Well, thank you all
Hello,
for joining us.
everyone. This is Pastor Scott Onquay. How are you doing? Policy Director for Faith in Place. And tonight we are here with our Advocacy Champion webinar to give you a spring session recap for legislative session that happened from January to April of 2022. And so thank you so much for joining us. And we are really excited that you're with us tonight. And so we wanted to just, I wanted to introduce myself. Again, I'm the Policy Director for Faith in Place. And then we are also with Christina Croaks, which is the Senior Policy Coordinator. If you can just drop in the chat where you are from, and it'll be greatly appreciated. Just go down to the chat bar and type in your city, and we'll be able to see that as you type it in. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we've got a great split of Chicago folks and downstate folks. That's cool.
Yeah, wonderful.
And even in Northern Illinois.
Great.
Great. Cool.
And so I'm going to, as you know, that if you're familiar with Faith in Place is a organization that assists people of all faith, actually sharing our mission about climate justice and our policy platforms, which we'll share in a little bit. But today's workshop is, again, what happened in Springfield this session, what we can expect at Beto session this fall, and then finally what happened in DC this past week as we traveled to DC for our Interfaith Power and Light Conference. So if you are familiar with Faith in Place, you'll know that our mission is to empower people of diverse faiths and spiritualities to be leaders in advancing environmental and racial justice, providing resources that educate, connect, as well as advocate for healthy communities. Now, when we think about advocacy, there is only so much that we can do as individuals and individual houses of worship. But I do believe and strongly say we must change policies and systems to create the world we want with clean air, clean water, as well as healthy communities. So we are people of faith. And when we talk about people of faith are a powerful force for change. And you will notice Faith in Place's advocacy has brought about great change. And so we are very excited to promote change as a group of people of faith. So the most effective advocacy is always done around issues you are passionate about. And so that's why we have a policy platform, so that we know the things that align with our policies and our platforms and the things that we're passionate about. And those are the things that we work on day in and day out. And so that's the same for you. When you start advocating for something, it's about something that you're very passionate about. And so that leads us to tonight's first poll. And so what issue are you passionate about? Now, we could not cover all of the issues, but we wanted to look at environmental health, climate change, clean water, economic justice, food access, as well as voting rights. And so if you can participate in the poll, it'd be great.
All right, I see those bars moving. Cool.
Yeah, I see the bars moving. Very good.
Although you might not see that yet. All right, we'll give it like 10 more seconds. All right, everybody's answered. I will show you the results. Can you see them yet? Or do I need to push this button? Okay.
No, great results. Yes.
There we go.
And so climate change, 67% are very passionate about climate change. tied for second, environmental health, clean water, and food access. And so those are great things to be passionate about. And surely they touch upon many of the things that we're working on at Faith in Place, as well as Faith in Place Action Fund. And
Right.
so we showed the interest. And so now I'm going to toss it, and I think I might have actually went too far, but I'm going to toss it to Christina just for a minute. We're going to cover the bills that we are watching. And so I'm going to go down the list real quick and then ask her to chime in. Now, the bills we are watching, we had the environmental health bill, and that is a ballot referendum. We also had a HB 4093 as well as SB 2906. That was an environmental justice permitting bill. We will talk a little more about that tonight. The economic justice, HB 4390 and SB 3210. That was the CJA technical edit fix. We're going to talk about that a little more tonight. Clean water, HB 4358, SB 3073. That was the Clean Lake CCR protection. Christina's going to share a little about that tonight. Climate change, that's a federal bill. That was called Build Back Better. We're going to actually talk about a new bill that's going to replace Build Back Better. Then also voting rights on a federal level, HR 4, voting rights on from a Illinois perspective, which is voting in prison. And we're going to share a little more about that, SB 828. And then food access, which is a better school lunches bill. And Christina's going to share something about that tonight. And that's HB 4813. And so one of the individuals I work closely with, as you know, as Christina Croce, the Senior Policy Coordinator. And I'm going to ask her to jump in right now as we move forward. And hopefully we have not burdened you with too much information too quickly, but we're going to have a great time tonight having some discussion on what happened in Springfield. Christina?
Sure. So we'll slow down and break these out a little bit more in just a minute. You probably can't read that text on your screen right now, but you can find all this information at that link above there. It's not clickable for you, but we'll make sure that you can see some of that information and follow up materials. So why don't we go to the next slide? So I'm pleased to share that we were calling it informally the CJA fix, but the Protect CJA Workforce Programs Bill, which was House Bill 4390, did pass this legislative season. Now, CJA, again, is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that was passed that was signed in September of 2021. But unfortunately, go figure, a 900-page bill had a couple typos, and those typos were really important and critical words that needed to be within the bill to be able to raise the full amount of money to support our workforce hubs around the state. There are 13 of them that we're working to establish. And so this was a critical piece of legislation that needed to pass this year so that we could get those up and running. And so the good news is that passed without a bunch of unfavorable amendments either. And so CJA is intact and doing what it should be doing. And we'll be working through those workforce hubs, as the year progresses. Hopefully we'll have some more news on that very soon.
Yes, before you move forward, and Christina just mentioned unfavorable amendments. And so part of the legislative process, and it's important for everyone to know this, is not as always as easy as an up and down vote. When you have a bill that starts off, you get your sponsors and your co-sponsors, you get a sponsor, it may run simultaneously in the House as well as in the Senate. And this bill in particular started out as an easy fix. We had HB 4390, our chief sponsor, leader, Marcus Evans, was supposed to, we thought it was just going to zoom right through. Well, lo and behold, there were others that had interest in adding things to the bill that made it a little messy in the process. And so this is one of the bills that came down to the last few days of the legislative session in order to get passed. And again, the good news is that it passed overwhelmingly without all of the extra amendments that were trying to get stuck in. And so when you're down in Springfield, you're talking to legislators and you're trying to convince them that this should be an easy fix and how important that $180 million is going to be to the workforce hubs that strategically are scheduled to go throughout the whole state. And when we started looking at the amendments, it got so messy, we didn't think the whole bill was going to pass, and we got a little worried. But again, after further negotiation and a little push from our chief sponsors, and I guess some committee revisiting, the bill came out a little cleaner than it was when they started adding on those amendments. So again, legislation is not as easy as you would think. You write the bill and then it just goes through on an up and down vote. It's always some extra stuff that happens in the process. All right, next.
And I would mention too, with legislation that's as forward thinking and as nation leading as the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, we should expect that there will be efforts to undermine the good work that has been done there, because it's, when you're the first at something, there's some uncertainty there, and that makes people nervous, right? So it's just further evidence that the work that we do in Springfield and the policy work that happens with Pastor Anquay and myself is critical to making sure that good bills stay good and bad bills go away.
Right, and it's interesting you bring that up again, Christine, because some of the provisions that were being presented, or some of the amendments that were being presented, was to weaken the Climate Equitable Jobs Act, so it would not be as enforceable as it is. And so that's why you have to be careful about special interests, because someone will say, well, if you're going to get the two-word fix to get your $180 million, we want to weaken this provision here so as to be more favorable to maybe utilities, or more favorable to fossil fuel companies. So you have to always have your eyes and your ears open at all times to make sure nothing sneaks in that's going to thwart your efforts that you're trying to pass a clean piece of legislation. So again, that's just some conversation that things that happen down in Springfield that you hear coming out of committees.
Right. So let's go to the next really exciting win that we had this year in Springfield, the Better School Lunches bill. I was particularly excited with this, as I have, 3 school-aged children that have many loud opinions about the food that they eat at school. So the Better School Lunches bill passed unanimously out of the House, unanimously out of the Senate, and there were some amendments made in the Senate to even make the bill even better, which is not usually how this works, and passed unanimously again on concurrence in the House. So what that means is even some of our legislators who we might not consider champions for food access, or we might not consider champions for sustainable food, healthy food, humane food, voted for this bill. This was a good bill for everyone, which again, is not often how this works. So this is really exciting to me and really prioritizes our school children. So just in a nutshell, this bill fixed the low bid statute in the Illinois School Code, so that schools who were on the National School Lunch Program had to take the lowest bid on their food service programs when they were looking for vendors to feed their students. The lowest bid was the only requirement, was the only requirement for how they acquired their food. So when you are required to buy the cheapest of something, just think about in your own life. If you could only buy the cheapest thing, does that mean you're getting the best quality thing all the time? Probably not. It also, just hurts, I think, the competition, right? That, there are pros and cons to lots of different factors that school districts were not allowed to consider. They could only consider price. And so that's really a race to the bottom in the quality of the food that we're able to provide for our children. So this allows schools now to consider criteria that they think is important in their school lunch programs. Do they want to prioritize local food, healthy food, maybe fair and humane raised food, sustainable products? They get to decide what those criteria are. And I'm sure no two school districts will do that exactly the same way, but they have now the freedom to do that. And so this was a good bill for members on both sides of the aisle of the House and the Senate. And so we're really excited about this because, again, school districts will be able to decide for themselves what pieces, what factors are most important for them. And I think it'll be good for our students, in the long run.
And it's good that this bill passed with bipartisan support. And I'm going to show you again how legislation works. This bill came to our attention because one of my favorite legislators, Jahan Corden Booth, just happened to be the chief sponsor on this. And so when I just asked her, what are you working on? And found out she's working on the Better School Lunches bill. I said, hey, this fits right into our platform at Faith in Place, food and land sustainability. And so we also think about food equity. And when you think about food equity, will the school lunches provide equity for all students? And we're starting to see, even around the country now, school programs are looking at allow lunches for those that don't eat pork, and then also considering students of Jewish faith. So there will be kosher lunches. And so these are the things that are important. So as they start bidding for their food, they can consider more than just price. And so this was a win-win. And we were so glad to see it just zoom through the House as well as the Senate. It went through the Senate. They added even a better amendment. And so when it got back to the House for reconciliation, everybody was just really glad to vote on this. And I applaud Christina because once I talked to her about the Better School Lunches, she caught fire on this. And she had her fact sheets and she was ready to share the information about this bill. And that's just how it actually works. You get passionate about something, you don't mind sharing with other legislators about how important this is. And then she tied in the fact that her children go to school. And she would like for her children to be able to have healthy school lunches that were not determined by the lowest bidder, but determined on other factors that hopefully that her children will be able to enjoy the food that they eat from the school. So again, this is I love to see that big green pass because this lets us know when something is agreeable and with bipartisan support, many people jump on board. Thanks.
Yes, so very exciting. So let's go to the EJ air permitting bill. We're going to talk about 3 more bills right now that did not pass during the spring session, but are likely to be called at what we call veto session, which has not yet been scheduled, but will take place sometime in late November, probably early December. It's usually not more than 2 weeks. Sometimes it's just 1. Again, it's not been put on the calendar yet. I want to pause for a minute as we talk about what veto session is and just remind you that we're in an election cycle. And so, legislators will be, campaigning right now and things like that. And so a veto session this year will be considered what's called a lame duck session, meaning it will be held after some of them have won elections or maybe lost elections, but they'll serve till the end of the year. And so that creates an interesting dynamic for maybe certain votes that they may not have felt comfortable taking prior to an election, but may feel a little more comfortable taking after. In this work, sometimes things make me feel a little weird or uneasy about the political system, and this is one of them. But recognizing the factors at play and how all the puzzle pieces fit together, is really important in how we can leverage, our influence and advocate strongly for the things that we care about. So the EJ air permitting bill is one of those bills that we are hoping will come back up at veto session after the general election, probably late November, early December. This bill probably had the votes to pass earlier in the spring session, but again, there was a little uncertainty there about it. And so they're pausing, and we'll take this up again at veto session. So the EJ air permitting bill is really important because if you've been following at all the general iron permit issue that's been happening up in the Chicago area, it's an issue where a community says, we already have pollution in this community that impacts our health, that impacts the way that we can interact in our community, and bringing in new industry that creates more pollution in our community, we should be able to say that we don't want that. And so this EJ air permitting bill requires that any new pollution source in an environmental justice community has to be considered and assessed when permits are being given. And if you have been following the general iron issue, that permit was not issued by the city of Chicago. The advocacy by those who live in that community and are on the front line of that issue, advocated very hard for, their community, and that permit was not issued. But it shouldn't take people going on a hunger strike to be able to get the attention of their elected officials. And so an EJ air permitting bill would allow communities to be able to say in their own language, which is also sometimes an issue, having translation services available at these community forums that will be held and such, being able to speak up about what they wish for their community to experience. Pastor O, what do you have to say about the EJ air permitting bill?
Well, many of you may be familiar with the term environmental racism or environmental justice. When we think of historically how polluting plants have been positioned and housed in frontline communities where Black and brown people live, when we think about the rates of asthma, breathing ailments, as well as cancers that are largely in communities of color or poorer communities, is more important to make sure that those community voices are heard when they plan to bring yet another polluting plant that can impact that community. And so this bill expands the public and community participation by requiring public hearings for permits that are under consideration. That is absolutely important. One of the things that we hear people say, well, I'm fighting for the voiceless. Well, you know what? Actually, people have voices and we just need to hear their voices. So if you give them an opportunity to speak up how this plant could affect their community, their livelihood, their living conditions, their health, then the permit will not be given so readily. So even though there is some challenges to the bill, we know overall this is a great piece of legislation because we need to have the voice of the community, and we also need to recognize the cumulative impact that will allow a community to be determined as an environmental justice area. And that becomes important because they have already been impacted by other polluting factors. And so this is a great piece of legislation, and hopefully, again, in our lame deck V/veto session at the end of the year, it will garner enough votes to get on the governor's desk. Next slide. Now, we are in election season. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But one of the bills that we were super passionate about was SB 828, Senate Bill 828, which talks about restoring voter rights to the roughly 28,000 people in Illinois prisons post-conviction. And of those incarcerated, 55% are Black and 43% are between the ages of 18 and 35. So when you think about that voting block there, 55% Black, 43% between 18 and 35, they have been purposely disenfranchised and to keep from being able to vote. So we want to make sure that people are brought back into the loop so that they can exercise their, I call it their God-given right to vote, because everyone should have the right to vote in these United States. So another bullet point, 95% of the people in prison return to their communities. And so even though they have been housed in other communities, and those communities have benefited from tax dollars because they count them as residents in their communities, when they return home, they return back to the communities that they left. And so they should be able to vote concerning who's going to govern them when they return back to their communities, or not only vote for who's going to govern them, but vote for policies and rules that's going to affect their lives. And so this just is a piece of common sense piece of legislation. And so hopefully during the veto / lame duck session, this will also have enough votes to make it to the governor's desk. Any comments, Christina?
Nope, I think you got it. Just, the fallacy that, people who are in prison should not be connected to the communities which they come from, is, deeply troubling to me. And that, when you feel heard, when you feel like you've been represented, when you've been able to cast a vote for your future, you feel more connected to that community. And so, we should be trying to keep people connected to those communities, even as they are incarcerated, so that when they get back to those communities, they're not completely disenfranchised from them. So it's very important to us.
Yes, great. So the Great Lakes CCR protection, Christina, you want to share about this? I know that we really were pushing this bill, and it was interesting how it made it to the floor, almost ready to be voted on, and a soft vote, as we call it, proved that did not have enough votes to pass. So it was pulled, but may appear again during the veto lame duck session. Share quickly, Christine, about HB 4358, SB 3073.
Sure. So first of all, let's break down what the title means. So Great Lakes, I think we've got that part, but CCR is carbon combustion residuals. And so that means coal ash. You might have heard it called coal ash before. CCR is maybe the more technical name for it. But this is about corporations cleaning up their mess. And there's a particular example up near Waukegan, where you have a coal plant, which is pictured here, which is literally on the shores of Lake Michigan. You can see that kind of in the background of that photo. And so when you have a coal plant that has to store all of that white ash that's burned off when you burn coal for energy, that has to go somewhere. And so it goes into these ponds. And these ponds can leach into groundwater, or can be flooded, or can cause all manner of environmental disasters on the shores of Lake Michigan, where 6 million people get their drinking water. So that's troubling, certainly. So this bill would require, as we are transitioning our coal plants out of our energy system and are scaling up to renewables, we need to have a plan of what to do with the mess that they leave behind. And so this would require that they remove the coal ash at this plant. So it's not just sitting there on the shores of Lake Michigan forever. This community doesn't want it there. There are safer ways to dispose of this coal ash, and the corporation that created the mess should be the one to clean it up. So that is kind of in a nutshell what this bill is about. It is kind of narrow in its scope, but would set precedent for, again, the other dozen or so coal plants throughout the state of Illinois that are scheduled already to be closed or are on a plan to be closed in the not too distant future. So this would set precedent that these corporations that run these coal plants have to clean up the mess that they leave behind. Any questions about that, Pastor O? Anything else?
No, you covered it pretty good. We just want to make sure that they understand that the beauty of Lake Michigan is that it's also Chicago's and many of the communities surround Lake Michigan water source. And so we don't want to have coal ash or residuals from a coal plant seeping into our water source. But then also we believe that it's an injustice that these plants would close after making all of that money and close without cleaning up their mess. And so again, Waukegan, largely a community of color, if that coal plant is allowed not to clean up their mess, is yet another example of environmental racism, environmental injustice when it comes to communities that cannot afford to clean up the mess themselves. And so we should not allow these corporations to leave their mess behind after they're closed. I think I said it all.
Yep. So those last three, the Great Lakes CCR protection, voting in prison, and the EJ permitting bill, air permitting bill, will all hopefully be covered or called sometime during the veto session. So you may see action alerts hitting your email boxes about talking to legislators and asking them for support for those. So we will be in your email box probably in the fall. So be looking for that as we go through the summertime. I see that there's a number of folks on this call that live in downstate Illinois that are Ameren customers. So that would be anybody basically south of I-80, straight on through down to the border, the southern border. So Ameren, there's two utilities in the state of Illinois. You have ComEd up in the northern kind of Illinois territory, basically north of I-80. And they're on a certain grid called the PJM grid. And then Ameren is the utility that most of central and southern Illinois connect to. Some people in central and southern Illinois have a municipal utility or a co-op utility. This is separate from that. So if you have a co-op or a municipal utility, this is not a part of your deal right now. But if you're an Ameren customer, if you get an Ameren bill in your house, this is going to affect you. So Ameren announced a few weeks back that they would be increasing their rates to the tune of $40 a month through the summer. And this, I want to be really clear that this is not because of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that was passed last year. All of the coal plants that are supposed to be transitioning out of use, those announcements were made well before the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was passed. So Ameren is trying to say that, because we're closing all our coal plants, the electricity to power your homes and businesses is becoming too expensive. And that's simply not what's actually happening here. We've got a perfect storm of things that are happening though. One of those things is certainly the Russian aggression in Ukraine is creating all kinds of uncertainty in energy markets. The capacity market, MISO, which is where Ameren purchases the electricity, they don't generate any of the electricity that they supply, they only distribute it. And so, to be fair, Ameren does not set the price of electricity. They only pass that along to the consumer. But when those prices go up, that means your bill goes up, right? It's been called a capacity issue in the market that they use because Ameren has to buy a ton of energy because there's a few simple things that they've not done very well in the last decade or longer. They've not been great about helping consumers be more energy efficient and access programs like a demand response program. Ameren calls it the peak time rewards program, which means on a super hot summer day, They might say, hey, I think everybody's going to have their air conditioning on today. Today would be a good day for everyone to chill on their energy use for a couple of hours on a peak, when we think it's going to be the hottest of the day. If everybody could reduce their electricity usage just for a few hours, that would really help make sure that everybody has enough, so that we don't experience brownout, so that we don't have issues with our grid that way. Most states have these programs, have had them for years. I grew up in Michigan. We had this kind of program growing up, where you might get an alert on your phone or by an email that says, hey, we're anticipating a high capacity day, and we need everybody to reduce their usage a little bit so that there's enough for everybody to go around. And that might look like turning off your air for a couple hours and running a ceiling fan. That might look like closing your shades to kind of bring down all the, the sun, the heat energy that's coming in your house. That might look like unplugging stuff that just doesn't need to be plugged in for that particular moment. Simple things that we can do to reduce our load, reduce the amount of capacity. So if we were more efficient, if those of us in Ameren territory were able to access more efficiency programs, we wouldn't have to buy so much capacity. We would be using a lot less energy. But unfortunately, programs like these demand response programs, Ameren has them set as a opt-in program, meaning you have to know, gee, I should be part of that program and go through the steps to enroll, rather than everybody being enrolled. And if you choose to opt out, you can. Every other state that I know of that has this kind of program runs it as an opt-out program, not an opt-in program. Mm-hmm. And as you can imagine, the numbers of people involved in peak time rewards demand response programs would be much higher if everybody was automatically enrolled. And so that is a thing that we're going to really need to advocate for, I think, in the days and weeks coming. They're saying that the rate hike will start in June and will persist through the summer, which means folks in downstate Illinois will be experiencing higher energy bills. I want to let you know that if you already can anticipate that this is going to be a problem for your budget, for your family, there are funds through LIHEAP, which is a federal program, that are available, and the application process for that is open until May 31st. We'll be sending an action alert along on this in the coming days, probably very early next week. We want to make sure everybody who knows they're going to have a problem, or if you know somebody who might be, maybe anticipating a problem paying for their bill, getting them connected to those LIHEAP funds. Also, if you anticipate that there's going to be a problem, contact the utility. They'll often be able to put you on a payment program or something that's a little more accessible for your family's budget. Nobody should have to decide between cooling in their home and their medicine or their groceries. And we want to avoid that as much as possible. So we're trying to let people know as quickly as possible that there is help available out there, and that we will help connect them with those resources. So watch for those action alerts from us. And I just put together a blog. There's a link there. It'll go out in some more materials in a little bit that you can read, explaining a little bit more in detail what the problem is, why it's not CEJA, as maybe the utility would have you believe, and what you can do about it. Want to interject anything, Pastor?
Yeah, no, go back to that real quick. Thank you, Christina, because I really wanted to share that it is unfortunate that the Ameren customer may experience a $40 increase during the summer months. And then also ComEd customers may not have that same experience. But it's important for all of us to recognize that all of us should be doing all we can to be energy efficient. And so next month, Christina, I, and probably pick someone from our green team, we're going to have a conversation about energy efficiency. And so some steps you can take to bring down your bill, whether you're in Ameren territory, ComEd, or even part of a muni co-op. So because we have already embarked on being good stewards. And so the less energy that we use shows that we're good stewards of the earth. So we want to make sure that we share that information with everyone on how you can be a more energy efficient, things that you can do. And Christina mentioned, even like pulling down your shades during the day so your house does not overheat and your air conditioner not running overtime, opting towards a ceiling fan instead of the air running continuously, and then making sure your homes are energy efficient. It's not just in the winter time that you're trying to keep out the cold. It's also in the summertime you're trying to keep in the cold. And so if you have areas that need to be tightened up or sealed, this is a good time to do that because you can bring down your electric bill. So we're going to have that conversation next month, but just wanted to share that with you. It's important for all of us to do what we can while we can. All right, now we're moving real quick. We had a great trip in Washington, D.C. I don't know if many of you know this, but Faith in Place is part of a national network called Interfaith Power and Light. And Interfaith Power and Light has an annual conference in the DC area. And this year was the first time we were back in person. And so Brian Souter, our executive director, Reverend Veronica Johnson, our outreach director, Christina, a senior policy coordinator, and myself, we went down along with some of our Illinois partners, because you may know that Faith in Place has expanded to Illinois as well as Wisconsin. And so we met some of our counterparts from those two states, and along with counterparts from all over the country. And this is just a couple photos of some of our legislative visits. We met with Tammy Duckworth's team and shared with her some of the things that we're working on. And we just took a picture out in front of the office. But then the other picture is actually inside the office of Congressional Congresswoman, Congressional District Number 2, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. And so that's a picture of us four with her in her office. And all of the meetings that we had were absolutely engaging. And I'm going to let Christina share a little bit. This was her first time at an IPL conference, and I think she had a good time. Did you have a good time, Christina?
I did. I had a great time. Any chance I have to leave my house is a good day. So there were two main things that we were asking our representatives and senators to consider when we were in DC, and you can see them on the screen here. So as you may or may not have been following, I'm kind of a policy nerd, so I follow this maybe a little closer than you, but I follow so you don't have to. The Build Back Better plan is dead in the water, is not going to proceed as we had hoped. However, there were some really good pieces of that bill that are going to get rolled into what's called a reconciliation bill. That's like your budgeting process. And so there are, we are hoping to lift, and there is very good support. It is not exactly bipartisan. I wish it were more, but there are the climate provisions from the Build Back Better plan are being put into the reconciliation bill. And everyone we spoke to from the Illinois delegation was definitely supportive of these things. So that was good news for me, at least, made me happy. But some of the things that you're going to find in this reconciliation bill that are good, good climate provisions will put us on a strong path, are the remainder of the money that it's going to take to remove all of the lead service lines in the country is in this bill. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure bill money that came through a little earlier this year is a start, but it is not enough. And so the $45 billion that is in this reconciliation bill will finish the job and get all of these lead service lines. Chicago, Illinois has the most lead service lines in the country. And so this is a big, 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 big issue for us, and something that we have been advocating hard for. It also includes clean electricity tax credits, $163 billion in environmental justice provisions, tax credits for electric vehicles that would also allow some of those tax credits that ran out for companies like GM and Tesla if you wanted to purchase one of their vehicles, but there was kind of a cap on how many they could sell before those credits went away. It would, remove those caps so that, people can those Teslas and those volts and bolts again with those tax credits. If I'm not mistaken, there's also some language being moved around. An equity piece about an EV is that not everybody can afford an EV. I have 2 plug-in hybrids in my household. They're both, 5 to 8 years old each. They're used. We bought them used. They're great cars and will last probably twice as long as a, average gasoline powered vehicle. But often those tax credits are not available for used cars. So there are some provisions being worked in that would allow, some tax credits to be realized if you're purchasing a used EV. That makes it more, accessible to families that have different budgets than those who can afford a Tesla. It would also put a price on methane that would help to reduce that problem, as methane is a huge greenhouse gas issue. And it would create the Civilian Climate Corps, which is, likened to the, the CCC that, was part of what helped build some of the amazing infrastructure in this country, way back when. So those are all, the provisions that we were most excited about in the reconciliation bill. And again, the people we spoke to from the Illinois delegation were definitely interested in supporting those things. There are some in the Senate who are not interested in that, and their constituents are letting them know too. Do you want to talk about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, Pastor Onquay?
Sure, I'll mention that, but just really wanted to mention the $45 billion for the lead service lines. Only $15 billion was put in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and so we know we needed more in order to clean up the lead service lines throughout the whole country, especially in cities like Chicago, again, where lead service lines largely reside. But another piece of legislation that we are super excited about, and IPL lifted this up for us, is the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And I don't know if you're aware, but in the state of Illinois, we have 419 species that can be endangered or on their way to being endangered species. So this is so we need some conservation assistance with some of our species here, even in the state of Illinois. So we want to look at an increase from a $1.7 million budget to a $24.5 million budget every year to assist in saving our endangered species in the state of Illinois. And we want to be more proactive instead of reactive. So with this $24.5 million every year, is going to actually save us money in the long run, because if you do the things that are necessary on the front end so that your species are not endangered, then you won't have to do so much on the back end and try to recover a species to bring them back from endangered status. And so it also
invest, job creator.
And it's also a great job creator. And so then invest $97 million per year to conservation efforts and led by tribal nations. Now, this is important because we know that we all reside on land that was captured from indigenous groups. And when we think about those tribal lands, this would invest money for tribal nations to lead the efforts in conservation efforts, and who not to do it but them when things how attached they are to the earth. And so these are important things, and we I don't want to use the word shop, but we shared this bill with our Illinois contacts, HR 2773 and S2, the Senate Bill 2372, and all that we talked to were definitely favorable. But this is just some more information to let you know that there is national or federal legislation that Faith in Place Action Fund is interested in. And we want to make sure that you who are connected with us are aware of the things that we're doing on a federal level.
Yeah, and this one's not up on the policy tracker yet, but it will be shortly. I will get that up very soon. So let's move to the next slide. We'll talk about this briefly, and we want to leave some time for questions at the end. So we just want to remind everyone that, the voting season is coming, and that the primary is June 28th and the general is November 8th. In the state of Illinois, to vote, you can register the same day, but you do need an ID and I believe some other pieces of information to prove that you live in the place that you say that you live. So you can register same day in Illinois. Not every state has that. In Illinois, to vote, you are not required to present identification while voting. In most cases, there are a few cases where you might need to. So the ID is not needed to vote if you are already registered. Mail-in or in-person registration, if you choose to do that ahead of time right now, the deadline for the June 28th primary is May 31st. So that's kind of upon us. So we wanted to bring it up, in case someone who needs to get themselves registered. Again, you can do that same day, but if you have a little time and want to get it ahead of you, you can start doing that until May 31st. Early voting in the state of Illinois, like for instance, I know I'm going to be traveling that day, so I'm going to need to vote early. So I can start doing that today. I live downstate. However, if you live in Chicago, you don't get to start early voting until next week. There were some issues with the new maps and districts and things, and so they had to bump that a week. But that will be open next Wednesday, the 25th. Was that the 25th? That's the 25th. You'll be able to early vote starting next week in Chicago. And if you have any questions about how all of this works, the elections.ill.gov is the place that you want to go to get that information.
Yes, thank you, Christine. And if you're in Chicago, let me just recommend that you definitely early vote. You want to avoid those lines on election day. A great early voting spot is right there at Clark and Lake, right underneath the train tracks there. And you walk in, it's real easy. And you're in and out in the time of getting in line and going to your little booth to vote, the time that it takes actually to fill out your ballot. So I definitely recommend that you early vote if you can, to avoid lines on election day. And also, just in case we have inclement weather that day, you don't want to have to stand outside in the rain in order to vote. And that's the same thing in November. You know that we have terrible weather that can happen in the city of Chicago in the month of November. So you want to get your vote out, your vote in early. So again, thank you for being a voter. And I have a question for you. I have a poll. Do you plan on voting in the primary? If you plan on voting in the primary, let us know. We'll give everyone a chance to respond.
Oh, that's everybody. Right, hold on. I gotta touch this button.
And 100% of the people said, yes, you plan on voting in the primary, which really super excites me because I love voters. Great. And so thank you for participating in that poll. And so make sure you tell someone else to vote. Now, we have a few minutes left. And so if you have any questions, if you can go ahead and drop it in the chat, that would be greatly appreciated. And I or Christina will do our very best to answer your question. Well, while we're waiting, okay, can you explain why it is called a veto session? Absolutely, John. Thank you for your question. Traditionally, the veto session was a session where bills that were going to, they anticipate the governor was going to veto, the legislative body can come in and override a veto that was done by the governor. And we know that a 2/3 vote can override a governor's veto. Now, it has morphed or transformed into a time where legislation that had difficulty getting passed during a regular session has a second life. But the veto was traditionally to handle any overrides of vetoes from the governor, traditionally. Okay, Jay, 160 million to be raised by utilities, raised from where and how will they use this money? So actually, the amount is 180 million. every year that will be raised by utilities, and it will be done as a ratepayer increase on your bill and a marginal increase on your bill in order to fund 13 workforce hubs and entrepreneurship incubator hubs that will be strategically located throughout the state of Illinois. We know that there will be 3 downstate, 4 in central Illinois, as well as the rest in the northern part of the state, including west side, south side of Chicago, Rockford and vicinity area, and the south suburbs. Now, it's important to know that these workforce hubs in the Climate Equitable Jobs Act will provide training to individuals that want to enter into the renewable energy field. In that training, we're looking at wraparound services such as childcare, transportation, uniforms, supplies needed so that the candidates that enter into the program can be successful. Also, in the entrepreneurship incubator hubs, we're looking at bringing up companies, entrepreneurs who want to get into the renewable field or expand their presence in the renewable field. And so in that, there will be some training for entrepreneurs. Also, there will be a inclusive financing provision. You may hear it's called a green bank, where individuals who would like to take low to no interest loans to help expand their business. Also, there will be some granting for individuals who want to expand their business. A grant will allow them to be able to make a bid on a project that normally, under normal circumstances, they would not have the income or the budget to pay for the upfront supplies as well as the workforce in order to complete a job and bid on it. And then in that 180 million each year are some benefits for training individuals that are returning home from their time in incarceration, and then other provisions that surround anything as far as expansion of workforce equity. And so that was one of the, I call it the flagship parts of CEJA, which is the jobs and the equitable jobs. And so we needed that money in order to do that. Now, when we originally went down to Springfield with this piece of legislation, we were looking at polluter pay. But again, when you're making legislation, you have to kind of do some compromising. And so our best case scenario was that a small increase would happen on customer bills, and the utilities would then turn that money over to cover the costs of the workforce entrepreneurship hubs. But great question. Thank you. All right. Well, you have been any. I didn't see any more. So okay, great. Well, it's right at 6:58, and so we typically like to finish our webinars within an hour, and so I think we're right on schedule. But before we go, we want to make sure you're able to reach us, and so on the screen is our contact information. I'm Pastor Scott Anque, Policy Director. I can be reached by email, scott@faithandplace.org. You could also reach me by phone, 773-405-3701. Christina?
And I'm Christina Kraus, the Policy Senior Coordinator. You can reach me at christina@faithandplace.org. And I'm downstate, so I've got a 217 area code, 343-4899. And we are so thrilled that you were with us this evening. We hope that you've gotten a little bit more oriented to what happened in Springfield and what more work is to come. And then, we'll be happy to continue to advocate for justice and equity in the State House.
Great. Now, of course, we could not do this without you, so we thank you for your presence, and we really appreciate you joining with us this evening. But also, we can't do this without behind-the-scenes help from our comms department. And so we want to thank our comms support team tonight, Katie Maxwell, for doing a fantastic job leading us, and I really appreciate her and her work. And so again, thank you for being a part of this great piece of work around what happened in Springfield, and look for our upcoming events in the chat. You might have seen, you can click on those and see what else is happening at Faith in Place. But again, next month, we're definitely doing something around energy efficiency, so look out for that. And I appreciate you again, and everyone have a blessed evening. Thank you.